Good day, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good day. So if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like, and share. And all of you that have been supporting, I'm very thankful. And without further ado, let's get straight to the point. So today I'm continuing with my episode 2. Yesterday I did colonization and post-colonization of the British Empire. Today I'm doing a second episode. You can go and check that out after the video. I'm doing a second video of why African countries and the global south, should not blame colonization anymore, because even though it happened, most of these countries, 60, 50 years after independence, they can't still be blaming colonization. And it's not even after 50, 60 years of self-rule, self-government, the leaders that now lead these African nations are African leaders, yes. And I know some people will start saying, they are puppets of the colonial empires, or all these kind of politics. But at the end of the day, they are African leaders. They live in Africa. They see the poverty, they see the inequality, but they don't do anything. So, and as long as we can compare with other countries, then there's no excuse, because even Asian countries were colonized, and now they are like, the Singapores, the Thailand, the China, India is coming up. So as long as other countries that are also in the same situation are coming up, are are advancing, we can't keep saying, they are puppets. And it's 60 to 50 years of self-rule, because you see, uh, when I look around where I live, the country I live, from the top to the bottom, the food chain, uh, the political chain of the strongest, who is the president, to the bottom, they're all African. They all have black skin. They all look like me, but the policies that they implement don't favor their people. So it's very hard for me to keep on believing that, even though these colonial empires still have a big say in these countries, but the biggest say comes from, the leaders. And it's very interesting when you read statistics about how African wealth is managed and abused and used, and you realize that, African, almost 200 billion to 300 billion is stolen away from Africa every year and hidden in these former colonial powers like France, Britain, and it is done by our own African leaders and African elites. And we receive, the same year, we receive $160 billion in terms of aid, remittances, probably Africans who are staying in the States, Canada, they remit, those who have high paying careers, they remit, we receive 100. So we are giving, so the wealth of Africa is being taken by Africans and hidden in these colonial powers, former colonial powers, these, offshore, these islands where the jurisdiction has enabled people to hide their wealth, like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands. They hide almost 200 billion to 300 billion a year, and then they take wealth from Africa, hide it there, and then the European Union, the United Nations, the World Bank give us loan to do projects like road, feed people. So you can see that it's just that, to call it frank, it's Africans who are playing themselves, because why are we, allowing wealth to be hidden in other places, and yet the same way we receive the money in some kind of loan, because the money that we give it out, we are not giving it out in form of loan, but when we receive money, we receive it in loans, aid. Most African countries now are struggling with debt. You look like a country, for a country like Kenya, the debt now is almost 10 trillion Kenya shillings. That's $100 billion. And our GDP is almost also, that $100 billion. You go to a country like Angola, it's in debt. You go to Ghana, to Nigeria, inflation is very high. But all these countries have swum in debt, and the money that is leaving could have alleviated this, debt issue. Records show since 1970, and most African countries, don't forget, they had independence from the 1960s to the 70s. so most African countries since 1970 to the year 2000, they've lost money that has been taken is of almost 800 to 1 trillion US, 800 billion to 1 trillion US dollar. So it means even after the colonial powers left, the same system of looting of, how I was telling you on the other episode, how the colonial empires ensured even when they build infrastructure, the infrastructure led to, were promoting an extraction kind of infrastructure. The railway was leading to the mine. The railways in Africa weren't made to, to create connectivity, or the roads. They were leading to the source, the mine, to the port. So if you look at the roads, they were leading to the tea farms, and then to the port for export. So it's the same thing of extraction, because now you see, even after independence, African leaders are still taking money, extracting and hiding it in these islands, in this jurisdiction where they cannot be caught. They are saying that wealthier politicians and Africans, have offshore accounts and offshore money amounting to $500 billion. They say out of a population of 1 billion Africans, because you're like over 1 billion, 165,000 Africans, have a wealth of $806 billion. This is crazy figures, So the whole wealth of Africa is controlled by 165,000 people, because they control almost $1 trillion, 806 billion, So if you look at these numbers clearly, for me, where I am right now, it's very hard for me to blame, colonial powers, because everyone was colonized or was in a bad situation. I remember, when I was looking at Kenyan history, its politics, I discovered that, when Kenya gained independence, it was a very rich and promising country. Even after the Korean War between the North Korea and South Korea, when they were split, South Korea was very poor. Kenya loaned South Korea $1 million loan. At that time, Kenya was more powerful than South Korea. Now, if you look at South Korea, their biggest companies all over the world, Samsung, Daewoo, LG, their GDP is $1.5 trillion. And funny enough, if you look, Kenya was way ahead of some of South Korea after independence, But if you look at now, there's no way, because everything, from the TVs, the fridge, it's them who make. South Korea has a population of 50 million people like Kenya. Kenya has a population of 50 million. But the Kenyan GDP is 100 billion. The South Korean GDP is 1.5 trillion. So this is a crazy number. If you look at South Korea, it's top 10, one of the richest country in the world, economically developed, a superpower. If you look at Samsung is top 500 richest companies in the world. It's $1 trillion company. So for me, I can't really blame colonization, because we must remember also South Korea, in fact, endured a very, very, also has a very dark history in terms of war, the war that it went with North Korea, and that split North Korea, because America was supporting the South and the USSR and China was supporting the North. And, it is a bloody war. There's never been, the war still continues, because the DMV is the most militarized zone in the world. The DMZ is the border between North Korea and South Korea. It was just there was just a stop of the war, but there has never been a ceasefire. There's never been a deal that to end the war. That's why you always see that Kim Jong-un is always very aggressive. The South is always preparing itself, working with America to protect itself. So if you look at the situation of a country like South Korea, it has also had a very dark past. So, and that's why I'm saying it's time for, the African population to unlock their mindset and start to realize that, the blame game cannot work anymore. It cannot work. We can't keep, as long as countries that are also in the same position are developing, there's no way. We need to put leaders into account. If you read statistics, they show between 2020 and now, almost, almost 10 to 15 African countries have slipped back to dictatorship. The countries that have split back to authoritarian are like 20. coup d'etats are like 10 to 15 countries, especially in West Africa, the Burkina Faso, the Mali, the Chad. So you start to see that it's a narrative, and it's very interesting, uh, when you read African history and try to understand it, to realize that the reason why Africa was so united during the British colonial movement, or during the colonial movement, if regardless of which country colonized France, Britain, is because at that time all African people had one common enemy, and the common enemy was the um, European or the French or the British, who one needed to remove. That's why all African countries united. But when the enemy went, the British, the French, these African leaders realized that now there's not that unit, that common thing that was bringing Africans together. Because remember, I told you Africa is it's a continent with one of the most tribes. We might look the same, but the tribes in Africa are so many, in the thousands. And so when the African leaders realized that the common enemy had gone, they had now to create a new narrative, a new enemy, so as to retain power and amass control. Because remember, these African leaders who took over, as I was telling you, were literally stooges, were literally handpicked by the colonial system to enable the colonial system to continue, because they were afraid that if they left these colonies to the real freedom fighters, because they already had invested, some of them had lands, big companies, they wanted to protect the interest. That's the same thing you see with South Africa, also people complaining about. So what they did is that these leaders started now playing the tribal card. If someone is caught with corruption, he says, you see, my people, these guys are attacking me because this tribe, when you need to. So that is the element that so Africans need to put leaders to account, and we can't keep on blaming colonization every now and then, because if it was colonization, we must remember also countries like Ethiopia and Liberia were never colonized, but they're in the same boat. Because if you're arguing that colonization is really that made us be here, then a country like Ethiopia and Liberia should be superpowers. They should be the most developed country. And we should see some kind of results, for that argument to dig in and be feasible. At least we could see, at least, and by the way, Kenya, Uganda is like this because we are colonized, but because Ethiopia wasn't colonized, developed all Liberia. So this shows that the whole African system, the whole African mindset needs to change. And the blame game cannot happen when we are hiding money and taking money to invest in other country almost every year, almost 200 to 300 billion, and then we are getting the same money again as aid, loans. So year on year, African countries keep on struggling to pay loans, meeting budgets. Like Kenya, it has a budget deficit of 600 billion Kenya shillings. Probably now it's 1 trillion Kenya shillings, the budget deficit. But when you look at the money that's getting away out of the country, that money can solve all these issues, in terms of healthcare, in terms of, in terms of school, in terms of infrastructure. It's even shocking that African countries, we still import oil from Saudi Arabia, Russia. It doesn't make sense when you have like Nigeria, one of the largest oil reserves in the world. Why isn't there a pipeline from Nigeria to South Africa, Nigeria to Kenya, providing oil? These are the questions that we need to ask. Because the Congo River is one of the biggest rivers. It can provide electricity for the whole of Africa. Why isn't that active? People can say, sometimes because of these multinational companies, they're in Africa, they're in Congo, they are mining, but who is the leader of these countries? The African leaders. Yeah, nobody can come at your doorstep and start mining without you approving it, And if you look very closely, these leaders who people are saying that their countries are being extracted from, if you investigate closely, they are taking kickbacks from this company to allow them to keep mining. If you're taking kickback, if a company is coming and destroying everyone and mining, that can make sense. But if it's giving you some kickback or some bribe for you to convince it to mine, that it means the buck stops with you. So I think it's time for Africa also to change our narrative, to start thinking how we can put leaders into account, and also how we can work also to grow our nations and to invest. And let's stop living in the past. Colonization happened, it's not a good thing, but at the end of the day, let's chant on, let's try to see what we can do, because others have done it. You don't hear the Chinese complaining anymore. You don't hear the South Koreans. The Japanese, Japan at some time was a very backward country, but now it's one of the superpower. You don't hear the Thailand, the Singapores, So this is it's an old tune that's getting too old. I think it's time we raise. I even would prefer that all this movement, Black Lives Matter and all this movement, I know they are very important, but I'll really prefer if really they emphasized on the economic and accountability of Black people and African leaders, rather than pushing the accountability of white people and of other races. Because at the end of the day, you know, even if white people are, let's say, people are saying they're oppressing them, at the end of the day, white people are working on their interests. Their countries, their system of governance is way ahead than. So if we try to put people who are not ours accountable, and yet the data shows that it's our own people who are failing us. It's not even the white people. It's our own people who are failing us 70%. So the pressure should be to put on the African leaders, the African governments, and not focus on the Europeans, on the Americans, because at the end of the day, they'll only do what serves their interest. And that is what every country should do, or every nation. African leaders should do what serves their nation's interest, not their personal interest. So the push should be to not put Europeans and Americans accountable. It should be put African leaders accountable. And I think that's where all these movements are going wrong. They should push to make, because when you're pushing for Europeans to be accountable in America, you are removing accountability from the African leaders, the African population. It's time that Africa starts becoming a serious nation, because I was reading another report saying that Rwanda has found, I think, 20 trillion, no, 10 trillion worth of gold. But at the end of the day, this is stories that we have had forever. There's no proof or any proof that that wealth will benefit the people of Uganda or the people of Africa at large, because it's not the first time that, wealth has been discovered in Africa. South Africa has $2 trillion worth of wealth, Congo has 24 trillion. Nigeria has one of the largest oil reserves. So it's not, until we change the system of governance and we start putting people into account, I think that's when you can start, being serious about these issues. Because even now, with all this wealth, African countries are drowning in debt, especially now, post-COVID, the dollar is getting strong also because of the war. So most African loans are in dollars. So we are sinking even more into loan. There's a fuel crisis, energy crisis. Africa has not sorted its energy issues. We are very heavy importers of energy, So you find that at the end of the day, it's us who are struggling. Now, oil in Africa, energy in Africa is expensive. Africa is a low-income continent, so people are even hurting more. There's food shortage. Even if we have the most fertile land in the world, but you're still importing food. There's a food shortage. People, are suffering now. And then we come to global warming again, because climate change is going to affect African countries, the most continent, because we are not prepared. We haven't even sorted any hunger, water, those kinds of issues. In a country like Kenya today, the past 2-3 months, there's been drought. I was reading in the newspaper, farmers were selling, farmers were selling cows at, at $1,000 to $500 one cow, but now they're even selling it at $50, $20, because the cows are, they are so thin, and they don't want their whole flock to die. Because now drought has come, there's no food. You have like 1,000 cows, 500 cows, and you don't want them to die. So you just sell them at from selling $1,000 to $50, $20. You see, so we need to, yes, colonization happened. It wasn't supposed to happen, but 60, 50 years from now, after self-governance, we need to show something. Even Professor Wangari Maathai said the same thing. A lot of philosophers, scholars have said, they've studied the political system of Kenya. I don't know if it's Chinua Achebe or I can't remember who was saying this, that it's only Africans, the African youth, who will go and cheer a politician, and the same politician is stealing their future. He was saying African jobless youth will go and cheer a politician, and the same politician is steering their future. So when you look at this, it's very hard to come to a conclusion really that colonization is the one that's keeping African poor. And I think we need to demystify that and look inward. As always, guys, it's always a pleasure. This is my second episode. The next episode is going to be difference between African colonization and slavery. These were systems of oppression. Slavery was where, during in the Industrial Revolution, before the Industrial Revolution, during that period, when it was about to start and a period of 200 years, because slavery started to diminish in the 1800s, and that's when the Industrial Revolution started to kick. But before that, how the need for labor for cotton and all those things, the Americans was very important to to these empires. And the difference that because people always confuse, yes, colonization and slavery, they were the same kind of oppression system, but the two were very different. And the Africans that came out of these systems were very different, although very similar. So I'll try to distinguish that and show the difference and probably the identities. And that's going to be my last. That's going to be my last episode of this part 3 series. The first one was colonization and post-colonization of Africa by the British Empire. And I'm also in that episode, I also talk about Congo and King Belgium. And today is just why African and the global South should not blame colonization 60 to 50 years after self-rule, should not. So, and the third is the difference between slavery and colonization. So, as always, guys, thank you so much for supporting. I'll keep you updated. I'll continue with continue posting the the normal geopolitical play Game of Thrones. The political atmosphere in the international scene, and keep you updated on the issues that are happening. This three-part series was brought about because I saw a lot of people, talking about how some the former colonies of Britain are not mourning the Queen as other. There was that division between some people felt that the Queen was important to them. Some didn't feel because they were former colonies. So this has been brought about by that debate. And that's why I started the first episode. Now I'm in the second and the third. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Until we meet again. Cheers.